We're coming right back here on Locked On NHL in Utah. It's a fake trade Tuesday. We're going to talk about what's going to take to bring a potentially big name into Salt Lake City. We'll talk about that on today's episode. Once again, Locked On NHL in Utah.
You are Locked On NHL in Utah, your daily podcast on all things hockey in Utah, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I am your host, Robyn Leano, alongside Tom Callahan. I want to thank everyone for making this show your first listen every day. We are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, including on YouTube, SiriusXM, also ad-free on Amazon Music. We got a great show on today's episode. We're gonna fake trade Tuesday. We're gonna talk about what's gonna take to bring potentially big name into the NHL Utah club. We'll reveal that name a little bit. Maybe you're wondering who we specifically may talk about. Maybe a couple of players. Before we get into any of that, though, Tom, over the weekend, just a couple days ago, we found out that the very popular salary website, salary cap website that everyone's been using, I've even mentioned it multiple times on the show, CapFriendly, will be going dog after the NHL draft, after they've been purchased by the Washington Capitals.
I have a friend who way back when in 2015, it was kind of the space became up for grabs when that's when, CapFriendly and a couple other websites started back then. He and I actually talked about one. He's a big Capology guy and was big on the numbers and everything. And we had talked about, would we be interested in moving into that space? We didn't end up doing it. But at the end of the day, I think CapFriendly filled the void the most when you look at what they did. And again, I mean, another guy who had worked in a couple of front offices in the NHL ends up forming that site. And now they're gone. The Washington Capitals are buying it. So that's interesting. Now, number one, it is free and open to the public through July 5th. So it's your last chance to take a look at CapFriendly. But it's interesting to me because it's not so much the information here that the Capitals are buying. I'm convinced it's the infrastructure of the site, the way it's able to kind of comb through contracts, sort and use projections. I think that is what the Capitals are buying. And so I think it's a really interesting pickup because previously they had contracts with all the NHL teams to be able to use their internal infrastructure, which we, the public, did not get to see. Now the Caps are going to buy that and bring it in-house. So that's an interesting move for the Washington Capitals.
It really is. And I think what's interesting is you've heard a lot of like how NHL clubs try to figure out, those contracts. Some of them try to keep those and also that information like quote private, yet CapFriendly always finds its way of publishing that info anyways. It's really interesting. Like I know, for example, as someone who's covered the Arizona Coyotes for as long as I have, there was always an article that said, per club policy, details of the contract have not been released or will not be made public. And 2 hours later, it's on CapFriendly. That's
why we always wondered back in the day how CapGeek got the information they got. Everybody kind of wondered. It was Matthew West who ran it. Unfortunately, passed away due to cancer in 2015. But man, everybody was like, "Who does he know?" Or what people? Because it couldn't have just been one person. He somehow just knew everything, details of all of it, and he must have been trusted enough by people to get the info, and then kind of CapGeek stepped into that void. But you're right. I mean, hockey is so secretive about injuries, about contracts, about everything. Nothing is public. So the fact that CapFriendly is able to do this, and other sites will try to pick up the slack now. It's crazy to me. It really is. It's unbelievable.
Over the last
did that so well,
over the last 9-10 years, it became a place for so many hockey nerds and media people and whoever who just was super interested in finding details on salary information, contract information, maybe even a little bit of stats, and some other kind of history stuff, draft stuff, all that kind of stuff. It became the place to look up that stuff, and everyone was like this like they don't turn anywhere else. And again, you take a look at the everydayers know on this show, those that have already listened to the show every day, dating back to the Locked On Coyotes days, we were saying, all right, like I've said multiple times, oh yeah, CapFriendly says this. I'm looking at CapFriendly, looking at, I even mentioned, I think even last week when we were talking about how Utah can weaponize the cap, like I'm looking at CapFriendly and they got like $20 million before they even hit the floor. All the information I get from there, which is which really gives you something to show you how much of an impact it's made. I will say this, Tom, and it's kind of something that we're saying a little bit off the air, that I mean, luckily they're not the only one out there. It's the one that made its name for himself, and it's a huge name. But there are a couple sites already out there that are working towards trying to fill the void, or at least hopefully will.
Yeah, when I was covering the Vegas Golden Knights during the pandemic, the site that I worked for, which shall remain nameless, but we had a deal with Puckpedia, which is how I became familiar with them. And we really, use their tools exclusively. So I got pretty good with that site. So Robyn, don't worry. I've got Puckpedia down pretty good. But there are other ones out there as well. But, again, it's just interesting to me, the Caps buying this infrastructure. And it's cool for armchair GMs to put together their budget, their team, make trades for their team, do all these different things. And I think that to have that calculator built in, this, I don't know if this is a surprise to people or not, but it should be common sense. NHL teams have two budgets. They have the ones that we all know about, cap floor, cap ceiling. And then there's the other one, which is the internal budget. And so just because a GM is out there saying, I'm going to spend to the cap if I can, that doesn't mean that that's the real budget. The internal budget may be 70. It may be 75. You don't know. It may be just to get to the floor. Everyone has a different number. And we as the public don't necessarily know that. And so that's just something that's important. But also, by the Capitals bringing this in-house, now what they're doing is they're forcing 31 other teams that had a deal to basically rent this infrastructure year in and year out to scramble and find their own solutions. Now these other teams are at a competitive disadvantage heading in, or I should say, once we get into free agency, like past July 5th. And that's something else that I think we can't really understate here.
Which will be an interesting thing, because I feel like, you mentioned Puckpedia. Who knows how far behind that is? Maybe another team is like, all right, we see exactly what the Capitals did of CapFriendly. Maybe we can do the same thing. So many sites are going to try to come up, but who knows? Maybe some teams are catching on and doing what they can. We've mentioned off the air, and I want to mention it pretty briefly, that Megan Shaika wants to create a similar site, try to do something like that. Actually, she at least mentioned it on Twitter/X. Those that aren't, super inclined on who Megan Shaika is, maybe you're super new to hockey. She's one of the very top names for hockey analytics, and has been around on hockey Twitter for quite a while, at least for the last several years.
And it's interesting, to your point, Robyn. What's to stop someone else from buying the next site? Now, are we going to enter a phase where this becomes a thing? And I'm not a huge analytics person. I think they have their time and place. I don't agree that you should run your team with analytics. I think that Moneyball only, it's not my thing. I'm an eye test person. I want to watch a player play. I want to talk to the player. I want to be around them. I want to get to understand them as a person and as a player. That's what matters to me. But yes, analytics can help you uncover some interesting things. So now, do teams go even more all in on analytics from a staff perspective, trying to develop the next CapFriendly internally as a software, as an infrastructure? And I think some of them are going to have to, because you may see other teams buying the process, if you will.
It will be really interesting to see. This is just a start, seeing CapFriendly go the way it did, very ironic that CapFriendly gets purchased by the Washington Capitals, but but I mean, I'm sure that was just a sheer coincidence. But there's still a lot to get to. There's still a lot to unravel. Maybe the more we know things, the more things come out about new salary sites like that. You'll probably hear stuff that we mentioned on this show, because that's again, as I mentioned before, that's the stuff that we rely on to kind of help us get some of the information out to you on. Even if it's just basic information, it at least helps us give a baseline to help you guys understand. But you mentioned, Tom, that CapFriendly is a place to be armchair GMs. We're going to be an armchair GM for the rest of the show. We're going to do a fake trade Tuesday to imagine what it's going to take to bring a big name into Salt Lake City. And we'll do that right after this. And today's episode is brought to you by Policygenius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives you your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family quick and easy. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Their award-winning agents can even walk you through the process step by step. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who have found their best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind and find the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes. See how much you can save. That's policygenius.com. Let's now get into some fake trade Tuesday, Tom. Imagining we'll take a big name into Salt Lake City. And let's start off with, I think you've already mentioned this name. See maybe like potential picks, potential assets that can be moved around for NHL Utah to acquire a name like, let's say, Mitch Marner.
Mitch Marner. All right. So yes, this is my stir the pot name, and I enjoy this very much because for a couple of reasons. So the Leafs are in an interesting, and I'm going to tie this into a goaltender trade as well, Robyn. So hang on here. We're going to get.
I'm excited.
So what the Leafs have. So I'll give you the numbers while I can still use CapFriendly, and then we're probably going to go to Puckpedia. So as of today, the Leafs projected cap hit $69.1 million. Okay, so LTIR space used 0, projected cap space 18.8. Great. And if you look at where the Leafs are right now, up front, 3 RFAs, 2 UFAs. On defense, they actually only have 5 contracts, 1 RFA, that's Liljegren, and then they have Brody, Evanson, Giordano, Lyubushkin, all UFAs. Somebody's not coming back there for Toronto. I get it. But up front is the interesting thing. So I'm looking at Marner. Marner has 1 more year at $10.9 million. That's a lot of money. Don't forget, there's also some sunk cost here for the Leafs because they have Matt Murray and John Klingberg, who now come off the books as UFAs. They're finally coming out of there. So they have Samsonov, Jones, and Woll in the crease. Only one of those guys, Joseph Woll, is signed for next year. So this is where I'm working around in my goalie trade. Okay, so now Joseph Woll, $766,000. Perfect. He's cheap, reliable. If he stays healthy, could challenge for a number 1. But if you're going to move Marner, you are going to need money probably to sign 1 more big defenseman, and you might want to shift some of that money around for Marner. But here's the other thing. You've got Tavares coming off the books in 25-26, and Marner would come off the books 25-26. So I think that they're going to look to move on from both those players. I like Marner, age, leadership, plays the right side. He's only 27, so I like that for him. I think Utah's got the room here, and I see Toronto going big after Jacob Markstrom out of Calgary. I think that the Leafs, rightly or wrongly, have decided that goaltending is the problem and Marner is not worth his money. I think Tavares was more worth his money. I can agree with that. In the playoffs, Tavares was way more worth his money than Mitch Marner was. Marner just bad playoffs. But in Toronto, I think that the spotlight is so hot and heavy on him, whether he wants to
Maybe a
stay or
change
not.
in pace.
Right, and he's got one more year left on the deal. But if you're the Leafs, how good is that team to you? And I'll ask you that, Robyn. How good is that team to you, that Leafs team? Is that team good enough to win a Stanley Cup? Are they good enough to get to a conference final? They clearly haven't been able to do it. So where's
On
the
paper they
shortcoming?
should. On paper they should be.
Exactly.
And that's the clear. On paper they should be. If you look at all the contracts and everything, it just doesn't work.
So now bringing Marner. So Marner is the guy who they look at as kind of useless, I think, or not useless, but just not worth it. So if you bring him in, there's not as much pressure to perform in Utah, but he's young enough, and he is your team's first superstar, I think, automatically. Comes in, will have the expectations of leadership, but is playing with a bunch of guys around his age. He's a little bit more of the veteran, and I'm sure Utah, we talked about the leadership and the captaincy and all that, a couple of weeks ago. Marner, who has worn an A, doesn't have to come in and fill that role. He can just be, and he can produce, he can play up front. Again, I know that Utah needs defensemen. So looking at that, if Calgary's coming out and Toronto still has plans on spending, because you always overspend. Here's the other thing. You always overspend in free agency. Whenever you're trying to, quote unquote, build through free agency, it just doesn't work out as much. You're going to spend extra money. That wouldn't bother Utah. That would bother Toronto. And even though the cap is going up next year, I think that right now the Leafs would like to present, and again, publicly, it's far more important for the Leafs to present this to the ticket buying fans of Toronto, that we're trying to improve. So I see the Leafs trying to splash out in free agency. I see them using that $10 million of free space and then bringing back, I would say, probably a couple of good solid core players, because one thing the Leafs don't have is a ton of young guys. Up front, Matthews is 26, Nylander's 28, and Nylander just got paid big time. But here's the thing, even you go further down the lineup, you're leaning on guys. Yarncroke is 32, Reeves, not that he had a big role, 37. And other than that, you got Matthew Knees, 21. He's the youngest one by far. The next youngest guy is Pontus Holmberg, who's 25. So I think that Toronto's in win now mode. And if you don't think Mitch Marner's part of that, moving him to Utah that has the ability to take on that giant hit and can deal picks and or prospects back, doesn't put Utah into win now mode, but because he is 27, but it puts them into win in the next 2 to 3 years mode. And I think that that's where Utah can build off a trade like that. And it allows Toronto to go out and spend to get Markstrom.
It's a huge lot of being able to move all that cap, and as we mentioned, where Toronto has only a smaller amount of space to work with. And Utah, as I mentioned in the first segment, has over $20 million before they even hit the floor.
Right.
Like, I think it's what 45 million until they hit the actual cap, which is, so
they have 43.5 million as of today, I think, in cap space.
So that's which is an unbelievable amount of cap space. And as we mentioned, that gives you the reason for Utah to be able to make a massive splash, bring in a big name player. But a lot of that goes with a remnant in what the Coyotes used to do, which was bring in those players who have had contracts that just weren't worth what their current play was. Were they good? That could have been an argument. Some were, some weren't. Some were just absolutely really bad under their previous management. They played for Arizona. They ended up playing really well. This could be a situation in which Mitch Marner could very well need this. He could very well need that kind of opportunity. And Utah can leverage that going, with that return and be like, hey, we're doing you a big favor here, taking something off your books, taking $10 million off, so we need some kind of fair transaction here.
And that's where I look at. So if you want to get a forward for a forward, again, what does Toronto want back? Probably somebody who's in that middle to late 20s. So you're looking at Alex Kerfoot is a guy who 3.5 million, only 1 year left on him. So now you have cleared essentially in taking Kerfoot back 6.5 million. Markstrom is 6 million. So you're able to do something like that. If you're going after more of a Jack McBain, who's a little bit younger, 1.6 million. I mean, that gives you plenty of room to work with. Plus, some of these guys are pieces that you can move. You don't have to bring somebody back in. I mean, I'm not advocating that Toronto would want to bring back another goaltender, but there's always a way. I mean, hey, Shea Weber's still there. No, I'm kidding. Can you imagine Shea Weber ending up a Leaf finally after all that? But that's the other thing, is that LTIR space that teams can use and can kind of use to hide in some cases, or not use to hide. Like, instead of putting a guy on LTIR, if you need to get to the floor, Utah, if they don't get there, they can activate $7.8 million of Shea Weber and just pay him and not put him on the IR, that type of thing. So that's why those deals get made. And I don't know if you want to get into the CBA or anything like that, because I know we're kind of coming to a point where now, just the other day, Commissioner Bettman said, hey, we're probably going to have a rework coming up here soon. This original one now has been in place 10 seasons. I think it was 13, 14 when they put it in place. And then they voted to extend it once through 25, 26. So they're going to have to start working on that one. So I know there's going to be changes. So you have to keep a mind towards that as well. But I think right now, for the Utah perspective, if you can bring someone in who immediately makes you better, again, selling tickets is not the aim, but the playoffs in probably 2 years is the aim, maybe 3 years. That's where you need to be. And so I think a guy like that is someone you could bring in. And again, I will say that I do think Utah probably needs to eventually get a little better. I think Connor Ingram's a great story. Vemelka has played well. Are they your guys long-term? I don't know. Are they getting you through the next 2 years? Probably. If you want them to, they're not that expensive. Combined like 4.6 million, 4.65 million. That's not too bad for two goaltenders. And that allows them to spend a little in free agency. And like I said, you're always going to overspend there, but that's where I would start. And then once the goaltender dominoes start, here's the other thing. A team like Calgary, if they unload Markstrom, they are definitely selling and rebuilding. That means you can jump ahead of them in the West. Anaheim, you're already ahead of in the West. The Kings need to retool on the fly to stay good. They were a little bit of a surprise this year, but the Sharks, you're better than the Sharks, in my opinion. I mean, Vancouver was a bit of a surprise this year, but you're better than Calgary, I think, or you will be better than Calgary if they trade Markstrom. So think about that. Now you're becoming a playoff bubble team, and you have to get those bigger names to get you over the hump.
Awesome. Exactly. And you're absolutely right. And you know what we're going to do? Let's get to some concrete trade information. Maybe some piece together exactly what the ideal trade would look like, and make an actual proposal. And then maybe I'll go ahead and tag our friends at Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs and see what they think about a potential trade offer of this out. And then see if they make a counter, we'll talk about it on the show. But we'll do that right after this. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. And you can bet all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to add a big win on your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's get to something let's get to some more concrete trade proposals, Tom, because we kind of talked about in broad strokes of how things would look and how the transactions should look like. But let's get to some more actual, like an actual trade proposal. Let's build an actual trade proposal here that we're, together we are Bill Armstrong. Let's build something that would be enticing to send over to Toronto to say, all right, this is something that's fair to bring over Mitch Marner over to Utah, and something that's fair that you guys can get back.
So let's start with looking at Toronto's draft this year. They have a first rounder, no second, no third. They have a fourth. They have 3 in round 5, no sixth, and 2 in the 7th round. So not a lot of picks there for the Leafs. And that's always something, obviously, it's very highly anticipated this year. It's a little bit lower pick, which, believe me, you want to pick 32nd, right? That means you won the cup. But so it's interesting to me. They have no second round, no third round. Utah's picks are higher in the pecking order. And maybe if you then, so we'll go over and look at what Utah has. We'll start with looking at Utah's draft. First round, they have theirs. Second round, they have theirs, Florida's and Washington's. Third round, they have theirs, Colorado's and Edmonton's. Fourth round, they have theirs in San Jose's, which is also going to be a high fourth round. Then they have their own pick in the 5th and 6th. Also in the 6th, they have Dallas. And then they have their own pick in the 7th round. So that's pretty stout. So let's say we're going to be able to package a draft pick in here.
Right.
So I'm thinking probably a second rounder's going in this deal from Utah and going to Toronto. Now we need to analyze Toronto's areas of need. Toronto could probably use one more defenseman, maybe. Here's the landscape for Toronto. You got 30-year-old Jake McCabe, who has one more year at $2 million. So he's through 24-25. You have Connor Timmins, one more year before he's RFA. And then you have Cade Weber, who's on his entry level at $875. So they all have one more year left. And then RFA, Liljegren, and as I mentioned, your UFAs are Brody, Edmondson, Giordano, Lyubushkin. The interesting part for me is I think Toronto got better with Lyubushkin. I think they needed to be a little bit bigger, a little more physical. I think they did not have that. So, all right, Robyn, here's where you're my assistant GM, or we're co-GMs. We'll be co-GMs.
All right.
All right, you take a look at Utah and you say, all right, if we're going to send Toronto a little bit of, I'll just say grit, whether it's on the forward end or the defensive end. And now keeping in mind there's 0 defensemen signed, but let's just say someone resigns, maybe they come back, and it's interesting because Lyubushkin used to be in the organization. But who do you pick out of that? Who do you think goes back that other way for Toronto to get a little bit tougher? Because a 37-year-old Ryan Reeves probably isn't filling that role for them next season.
No, probably not. I'm trying to look, see if I can bring up both their pages as well as I'm going through all this. I think this is where things get a little bit more tough.
Well, they do, and because you want to send somebody over who, fits the bill. And I'm looking at a guy. So, and I brought him up before, but Jack McBain. 6'4", 218, young, 24, could be a guy who 55 points in 159 games. He's not there for his hands. I mean, he can contribute offensively, but that's not his role. He's a checking line guy, energy guy, big kid, still young. And I think that he's got some legs in him and can fit into that type of role. Now, here's the flip side. If you're Utah, and I like McBain as a player, I enjoy having his presence out there. The question becomes, if you're Utah, you're getting a different player in a guy like Marner. If you're bringing him in, but you're giving up this element, are you okay with giving up this element? That's the other part of the deal. And what else are you going to package along with this? Because I don't think a second rounder in Jack McBain is enough to get Marner from Toronto, unless somehow they really just decide they're going to punt on this guy and everybody knows it. That, of course, is when the asking price comes down. But Toronto also wants something that's going to help them win now. So this is where you have to say, does Utah have any prospects that are ready? Do they really want to give up any prospects that are ready? I mean, it's tough to look at Utah's list of players because they are so young outside of Bukestad and say, oh, there's a guy I would be happy to let go. They are young and they're building, and plus they are going to have to be busy in free agency. Now, again, of those defensemen not signed, somebody's coming back. 3 of those guys are RFA, Dursey, Moser, and Valimaki. somebody's coming back out of that, qualifying offers, and you have to have players in camp. So that kind
And
of
I feel like
becomes
those three were also just working. Those three were worked in it with under that system as it was. So like, I don't see that going like that being an issue. But continue.
So, and I mean, Josh Brown is 30. Do you bring a Josh Brown back, or do you figure you can find someone just like a Josh Brown in the open market? Travis Dermott. Can you find somebody just like him out there on the open market for less? And that's the other thing is, do you care about saving the money as much as Utah? Again, they need to get to the floor. So I think the other thing that they could do is if there is a deal, let's just say, because Tavares has been the other contract that's been talked about here. If he swung through, and this is where the cap space becomes a weapon for Utah. If Tavares is dealt somewhere, and as part of the Marner deal, he bounces through Utah, and Utah says, you know what, we'll retain half of that. That's a huge chunk. So if he goes there first, and Utah says, all right, we'll keep $5.5 million, and then he gets traded on. Now that is something that Toronto does not have, is that kind of room and that capacity. So that's where you weaponize that cap hit. Now, of course, that depends if you can make him a move to somewhere else. But does he go to Calgary as part of a Markstrom deal to go all the way back? Wheel myself back to that goaltender trade, because I really feel like Toronto has convinced itself goaltending is its problem.
They could very well.
I see your wheel spinning. I see the wheel spinning here.
I'm trying to look, and you're mentioning defensemen, so I had to take a look at who are the currently signed defensemen for the next season for Utah, as at least for the prospects. And there were only three prospects signed next season.
Right.
And we're talking Maverick Lamoureux, Maximilian Suber, and Montagna Anabuchi. I couldn't really see either of those moving. I mean, you could potentially, but
this is where it gets interesting. And again, this kind of leans on the idea that if Utah's going to get Mitch Marner, that they need to also help Toronto out in other ways. And I think that the potential to move that heavy contract of Tavares coming through Utah, and then Toronto kind of says, all right, well, you did us a solid. And that's going to give them even more money to maneuver, and then really sign some other guys and maybe dive into free agency.
Sort of kind of reminds me of a little bit. I'm trying to think. I think it was also a situation that included Toronto, in which they traded a player to one team, so so that team can buy out their contract so they can hit their salary needs. Those that don't know what I'm talking about Toronto trading Patrick Marleau to Carolina. If you remember that trade a few backs ago, and they worked because they needed to shed some cap in some way. They needed to shed the cap of Patrick Marleau, but they couldn't afford buying him out. Send them to Carolina. Carolina bought him out. Different scenario, but kind of the same thing. I think of what you're thinking about here, and that's kind of what my brain was going to for a minute.
Okay, so you ready? I got one more breadcrumb in the trail for you. This is the crazy twists and turns of how you see things develop step by step. So the Marner trade happens. Tavares ends up in Calgary. Markstrom goes over. So now the net cap gain in all of that, I believe, is going to be approximately $7 million for Toronto. That means, are you ready? Drum roll, please. Steven Stamkos becomes a Maple Leaf.
Good God.
Stamkos leaves the Lightning, goes to Toronto to finish it out.
That would be an interesting turn of events. Honestly, it would.
Because they would have the room, they'd be able to afford him. And that, are you kidding me?
Leaf
fans
they would take that deal. I mean, they would try to get any opportunity to get Steven Stamkos.
Even at 34, and he's a guy who's won a couple of cups. He comes in, all respect to Johnny T, Stamkos really knows what it takes to win and has been on a dominant team that was a borderline dynasty for a couple of years.
Absolutely.
So
I'm
just saying.
Let's finish the concrete trade. We got just a couple minutes left on the show. Let's finish that concrete trade. What is everything moving to and from Utah and Toronto?
Okay, so this becomes a three-way trade now. It ends up with Markstrom going from Calgary to Toronto, then Tavares and Marner coming to Utah, and then Tavares going to Calgary, half the salary retained by Utah. Marner obviously stays. McBain and a second rounder going back to Toronto. And potentially, I'll say another prospect or another pick. Maybe it's a second and a third in this year's draft. Although, again, Toronto to their end would have to say, hey, we're doing this because we're going to do something in free agency as well ahead of the draft. But it also now gives them the picks in the draft. And so I think that maybe that's what it is, a second and a third, and McBain half the salary on Tavares to Calgary, Markstrom, and then that's how those dominoes all fall.
I like that. I feel like that's a good I feel like would be a convincing enough package for
or a second rounder this year and a second rounder in 2025 because Utah has 4 of them. They have theirs, Toronto's. You can have it back. Honestly, Edmonton and New York. So a second this year, a second next year.
Honestly, I think that one could work. Because I feel like, again, adding another second, like those are coveted after, which is, I think it's funny because I think Arizona / now Utah has just always carried so many second round picks that they've leveraged that so many times already. It's like,
sure,
hey, we'll take we'll help you out. We got a number of extra second round picks. Which one do you want?
They have 10 through 2026. They have 10 second round picks right now through 2026. It's crazy.
Yeah, they can definitely do that. All right. So from Calgary to Toronto, Jacob Markstrom. From Toronto to Utah, we're getting Tavares and Marner. And then from Utah to Toronto, a 2024 second round, a 2025 second round, and Jack McBain.
And don't forget, Tavares goes to Calgary.
And the 50%. Yeah, Tavares goes to Calgary, 50% salary retained.
Now, and of course, I'll tell you the one thing I don't know, and I honestly didn't look, so this would be on me, but I didn't look at Tavares' no movement clause. Both Tavares and Marner, by the way, have no movement clauses, which would have to be waived for that to go through. So I don't know if they do that or not, or I don't know if Marner wants to go right on in and test the market. But if those two players were to say, okay, we'll take the trade away from Toronto, that would be interesting. Now, it's honestly, sorry, Calgary, the trade is probably more enticing to Marner than it is to Tavares, a guy who's towards the end of his career and would probably like to chase a cup before he hangs it up. For Marner, you're going somewhere to build something that can be really great in a couple of seasons. By the time you're hitting 31, Utah can be a big time powerhouse team with you driving the bus. So, but, and I mean, you're trading your captain is something. I mean, 33 years old, but man, that's a heavy contract. But again, if you hang on to him for one more year, he's just out. Are you going to lose him for nothing? When you could bring in the goaltender you want? I mean, I don't know if he's the guy they're going to be able to move and talk into going. I don't know. I don't know if that happens, but if it does, I feel like Utah is the more appealing destination.
it's more. I think a lot of people. So it's interesting, and we're getting very close to being out of time here. It's interesting because I feel like there has been a lot of criticism towards Utah right now, saying, "Oh, no one wants to go to Salt Lake City because it's because of X, Y, and Z reasons. There's nothing to do there." Which honestly, if I'm an NHL player, I would only see like going to Utah as an opportunity to just get a fresh change of pace. And then especially if you're a guy like Mitch Marner, you can be that one of the stars, someone who can be one of the first. And again, we go back to what we mentioned a couple weeks ago, even last week. One of the first players whose name you'll carry on a fan's back of a very new team in a new city. You could take advantage of that. That would be an extremely enticing reason. Plus, look, Salt Lake City is a major city. It's got it still has plenty to do.
And I just looked it up because I know this matters when you're making that much money. They have a flat income tax of 4.65%. So while it's not quite income tax free like Tennessee, Florida, Nevada, etc., Washington, it is relatively low on the income tax side of things. So 4.65 is not bad. It's right around the national average, I think, actually. Could be worse.
It's not bad. I know.
Could be worse.
Could be other states that would have like a much bigger chunk.
It's not Canada.
There you go. Yeah, it's not Canada.
You're making money by leaving Toronto.
Yeah, exactly. You get more money out of it. But what we'll do is we'll close things off on this episode. If you have any thoughts about this trade, feel free to leave a comment. If you're on YouTube, just leave a comment down below. If you are just listening elsewhere, just find us on social media at LO_NHL Utah on the app formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. Also myself at Robyn_Leonio, Tom Callahan at Callahan on air. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave a review, drop a like, leave a subscription if you've yet to already. We're trying to get to 1,000 pretty soon, Tom, right? We'll see how quickly we can get to 1,000 subscribers. We already went over that 500 hump, so let's see how quickly we can get to 1,000 subscribers. Show everyone that Utah is ready for hockey. But
doesn't cost you anything to hit the thumbs up. Doesn't cost you anything to like us. If you're here, you might as well do it while you're here.
Yep, exactly. It is free 99 to subscribe. That's the term we would love to say. Free 99. Anyways, thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. We'll see you guys next time.